do I feel valued? Yes or
Mhm.
no? And what I tell a lot of creators and what I do is, just start by rounding up. If I did all these calculations and it's 5,400, I'm going to round
Mhm.
up to six. I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, this is a business brand and business is what I talk about on my page. I'm going to ask for at least 9,500. And that might sound like a big sticker shock. Like, how did we
Mhm.
jump from six to 9,500? But you're going to be
Yeah.
negotiating. So if
Yeah.
six is kind of my bare minimum that covers everything I calculated, I'm
Yeah.
going to go higher up because that's a premium for a category that I know I'm an expert in.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today I'm joined by Lisette Calveiro, and I'm really excited because Lisette's case study is all about brand deals and paid brand partnerships, which is something that I've taught personally at my own retreat, but it's not something that we talk about a lot here on the podcast. So I love jamming with someone in this space who can really open your eyes to this revenue stream and all that's possible. So I'll give you the teaser of Lisette's case study in just a moment, but first, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So excited to have you here. Before we get actually into the details of your case study, I would first love for you to share with our listeners your own Cubicle to CEO story. What was that final catalyst that led you to creating influence with impact? Or maybe you had something before that even. So what was that catalyst that led you to entrepreneurship?
Yeah, it's actually very literally. I was thinking to myself, I keep building, departments in the influencer space for other people. Why don't I just build my own company? And what I had, traditional story, it was the side hustle for a pretty long period of time. I would say about 2 years before I actually, quit the cubicle job. And I started with brand partnerships. That was my sole side hustle dream. And, I know we're going to dive into it, but it's so fascinating to see how the space has changed. My first brand partnership being in 2017. And we have changed a lot since then. It sounds weird to say back in my day. And, what I was also doing at the time was consulting different advertising agencies in-house about how to work with influencers. I said, why am I not just taking this full time? And that was my story.
I love that. 2017 was about a year after I had graduated college, and I can totally relate. Like, I knew about influencer marketing and I had been kind of exposed to the space in college, but it was still very much the beginnings, I feel like, of what it's become today, this entire industry, which, I think the growth and evolution of the creator industry, even the word creator instead of like influencer kind of taking center stage, I think just shows how this space is always evolving. But I think a lot of people get scared off from trying to do any brand deals or brand partnerships in their business if they don't identify as a traditional influencer or whatnot. So that's why I'm so excited to bring this conversation to the table today with you. And Lisette's case study, just so you all get a preview, is all about how she's able to generate about 20% of her business from brand deals specifically. So in a year, making about $130,000. So imagine having a six-figure revenue stream. It's not even the entirety of her business, but a huge player, right, in driving revenue and growth for your company. So we'll really be focusing on the negotiation aspect today in your case study, but let's kind of look at the numbers first. So especially this last year, as we're reflecting on 2024, how many unique deals does that average of $130,000 actually represent?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And I will say, if I'm thinking about this is a good note, the amount of brands I'm working with, it's actually only about 10 to 12 brands the whole year, but a lot of them will give me multiple touch points, which is what really helps drive that price up.
I love that. Less negotiations, less contract work, but repeat campaigns. So for our listeners, if you've never approached a brand deal before, I almost like to think about it like it's not really that different than working with a client and selling a service, right? You're just trying to renew that business or keep them on retainer or whatever that looks like. So, okay, 10 to 12 brands that you've worked with. What is your average deal size per campaign that you book?
Yeah, it's anywhere from 8 to 10. I will say 5-figure deals are pretty normal if they are kind of like a year round, or, and I know we'll probably get into this, when they involve more than just content. I've actually been hired for a few things. When you're a thought leader and a content creator or influencer, whatever label you want to use, a lot of times I've actually been hired to do side projects, one campaign, I was doing the content, what you think, the hashtag ad, but they also purchased some of my strategy sessions that I could give to creators. So it's very unique where they kind of add in the other services already known for.
I love that. And $8,000 to $10,000. I mean, that's normal to you. I think it's a huge deal. And it really shows how it's not just, like you said, about posting on Instagram or posting a TikTok and saying, hey, this is my rate per, short form video that I put out there. You can really get so much more integrated with a brand. So let's talk about that piece actually, because I think so many creators, so many business owners oversimplify or maybe over prioritize how much their audience size plays into how much they can charge for a brand deal. So you and I are very much of the same mind that rates are so much more than just the size of your following and how much it costs for you to, post a video on Instagram. And I mean, we both probably have experienced that there really is no one size fits all standard pricing across the industry. It very much is kind of like a Wild West, but you have a really unique way of looking at how you break down a rate. So let's go through each aspect of what you consider when you're compiling your own rates for these brand deals, starting with deliverables, the most obvious one. Tell us, maybe use a recent campaign as you're walking through these different aspects.
Okay, so for me, rates really start with the deliverable. And the way that I like to calculate it is anywhere from 1 to 5% of whatever audience I have on the platform they're asking for. And that range, and we'll talk about negotiation, but it kind of helps me stay within a range that feels equitable, that feels good, and I feel valued for my time. And that is, again, only line item number one. But I like to kind of also figure out, we all have times and seasons where maybe our engagement or our views aren't as good as they always are. So that also helps me, navigate rates in a very fluid way. Then after the deliverables, you want to consider licensing and usage of your content. And something that I think a lot of people don't realize, it sounds really great for a brand to tell you, we are boosting your content to everyone. But when that happens, that means your name and likeness is being used for a longer period of time. That also means maybe the competitors of that brand see the ad and they think, well, we can't really work with you because we see you're working with XYZ brand. So you really want to charge, what I do is percentages, almost like a tax for that. Once I figure out that bundle of deliverables, I'm adding starting at 20% for whatever the different asks are. And I just kind of try to go up on that usage tax, basically based on how widespread my name and likeness will be used, because the more widespread it is, the higher the risk of me not getting other jobs in that category, right? And the longer that my name and likeness is used.
Oh, I was just going to say such a great point about the opportunity costs. Like what other deals are you potentially leaving off the table because like you said, your brand is wrapped up in this other deal. But before actually you continue the rest of your thought, I do want to backtrack real quick to that first piece of, you said charging between 1 to 5% of whatever audience size that content is getting in front of. I just know that there are some listeners who have literally never done a brand deal before and they might be already lost just at that point. So can you give like a quick example of what you mean by that?
Yeah. So deliverables, I like to explain as the physical, literal thing you're making and posting. So for example, they might tell you one Instagram reel and a story set, of 3 frames. So those would be 2 deliverables. I would use that percentage for each of those. And for example, maybe I'm having a really good season where every reel is going viral, things are looking really good, but then I also might have the same season where my stories aren't getting as many views, not as many clicks. So that's how I can use that dynamic range to go up or down. And also think about your deliverables. Sometimes they may not be posts. Sometimes they may also be a strategy session that they hire you for. You may do some consulting for the brand as well because of your authority. So in deliverables, I know those kind of extracurricular don't really work in a, audience size based piece, but I always say think of your authority and charge accordingly for all of those extra pieces.
That makes sense. So like, let's say, for example, that your reels are getting an average of 10,000 views each time you post. So you're saying in this particular instance, if the brand asked you for an Instagram reel, you would say, okay, 5% of 10,000 is what? What is that? Like
No,
$500?
so I'm actually saying percentage of your audience size. So
Oh,
not your
audience.
average views. Yeah,
Okay,
because
gotcha.
views fluctuate so much,
Yeah.
right? But what I'm trying to explain is the price might go up or down depending on how good your content has been performing, right? So
I see. So almost like a
yeah,
premium.
exactly.
Okay, so let's go back. Okay, same deal then. Like let's say your total audience size is 10,000 followers. You're saying normally a reel would maybe cost the brand 5% of 10,000 followers. So 5% of 10,000. Again, I'm doing the math. Is that $500? Is that math
I
correct?
think so. I'm like doing
Okay.
the math in my head, right?
Let's say, for instance, that is the right answer. Then you're saying from there, if your reels are taking off, they're going viral, you might add an extra premium to that and say, okay, actually right now the reel is going to cost you like $750 because it's been performing extra well lately.
Correct. And that's actually line item number one. So I find that you're probably not even stopping at 700.
Okay, amazing. That's super helpful. Okay, go back to your previous thought. Sorry, I had to interrupt your train of thought just because I knew some of our listeners might be a little lost and I wanted to set that foundation before we get there. But
Perfect.
yes, you were talking about usage, the usage tax. So continue on that train of
Yeah,
thought.
and thank you for doing that because I think there is that misconception that you can only charge for the thing that's going live and based on your following. And I think that this also affects smaller creators in particular. And we'll get into that. Line item number six is, you have to also think about the labor. Like you might have 1,000 followers, 1%. I don't want you charging $10 for a post, right? If I'm doing the math
Mhm.
correctly. But I want you to consider as a starting point and then adding in these different premiums that are going to get you to a more equitable price. So
Amazing.
usage being that other piece and hey, every single contract will always state the deliverables, state the literal pieces of content you're making. They will always have language around usage. So even if you didn't get that up front, ask
Mhm.
about it because it will be there. I've had some brands who are like, I want to completely buy out your content. And this happened to me actually with a long-term partner who loved the content that I was making. And they said, it's been performing really well on our website. What does it cost to buy it out? That's going to cost you probably in the five figures because you're going to use that photo until who knows when, right? So
Yeah.
really explore, and this we'll talk about negotiation, but that's one of the pieces is you really have to understand the full scope of the work that you're performing, and it doesn't only include the thing that's going live.
So smart. So the usage piece, just a quick context for, again, if this is like a new term to you. So like in Lisette's case,
Mhm.
in this example, like if she was charging for an Instagram reel and a set of stories, the usage is like, okay, in addition to me posting it on my channels, you're now wanting to utilize my content. Maybe the brand wants to repost it on their channels, or maybe the brand wants to take this piece of content and put ad spend behind it. That's all
Yep.
additional usage. And that's what you're saying, that you're charging that 20%. Is it 20% of what the original deliverable cost? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay. And is that
Yeah.
20% every month that they're paying? So like if they want 3 months of usage on this reel, are you charging 20% every month or total?
Correct. Yeah. The other piece to also remind people of is again, I don't want to overcomplicate. There's so many words they use, like whitelisting and this or that. Just ask the brand to clarify, hey, how long are you actually going to be using my content? And can you clarify in what way? Because another thing I
Mm.
see often is they'll say something like 1 year of paid usage rights. And all they literally mean is at some point in this year, we want to use this in an ad. So I
Mhm.
always like to clarify because these costs do add up. You don't really want to
Mhm.
give them a big sticker shock just because they, overcomplicated the terminology they were using.
Oh, yes, I love that. And speaking of terminology and like sometimes being sneaky about the way they fit it into contracts, I've noticed lately that a lot of brands, they'll put some sort of clause in the contract that's like some version of work for hire, which essentially,
Yes.
right, just means that like any content you create under this campaign is theirs outright. They own it outright. And that is one that I always tell people you've got to double check is not in the clause, especially if the content you're creating, like if you are an expert and part of your content includes your intellectual property, like your strategies, your whatever that you're teaching in the content. If you sign that over to them, you now don't own that IP.
Yeah.
And so that's a really great point to like remember to look for different ways that a brand might word the same idea.
And it's so interesting because it just really depends on their legal team. A lot of brands will say, well, to save our butts, we need to make sure that we just buy out this content. But we didn't talk about that. You talked about paid ads. So
Yeah.
always strike it through unless literally you're talking about a complete buyout of your intellectual property, which again, that's five figures plus.
That's really great to know to set that standard for, yeah, that level of not even of usage of outright ownership. The third thing that you've kind of already previewed or referenced is the production cost, like your actual labor to create the content. content. Tell us how you think through that for yourself, especially if there's like a recent, maybe larger campaign that you did, how you kind of tallied that labor cost for yourself.
Oh, yeah. So when you're doing a brand campaign, something that's just a part of all of these is a brief. So you will get a creative brief that tells you, I want you to make this type of content at this length, right? Especially with Instagram Reels now. It could be a quick trend that's 8 seconds, or it could be a 1 minute long video where you're doing dynamic locations, you're speaking to camera. So really understanding what the content you need to make up front is pretty important, because that way you'll be able to price your labor accordingly. So what I like to tell people is, when you've got the brief, start to just map out from a very high level, right? What do you think you're going to make for this? In one recent example, I was able to charge $7,000. And by the way, my starting rate is anywhere around 4,000 for one deliverable on Instagram. It
Yeah.
can go up or down. Let's say it's stories only. Yeah, that might be lower because I know it's only going to a very tight-knit community, but that's kind of where I like to start. And for this post, I was actually able to charge 7,000. There was usage involved that kind of struck the price up. But the really important piece is, when I asked for the brief, it was asking for a high quality video, 1 minute long minimum, where I was talking about business trends. And, they wanted me to submit the script, which I always recommend actually, because it'll reduce the amount of edits you have. So doing this, I looked at it and said, I'm going to have to pull out my professional camera. I'm going to go to different locations. I know from start to finish, this is probably going to take me at least 8 hours. Like, it will be a whole day collectively of me editing this content. So this
Yes.
piece does take a little bit more of experience. You may not get it right the first time. You may be like, wow, I spent like a whole week on this, and it's okay. Next time you know what to charge, right? So once you figure out the amount of labor and hours that might take, I tell all my clients, and what I do is give yourself an hourly rate that feels good for your level of experience. For me, I use professional equipment. I'm on Premiere Pro editing videos. I'm not doing mobile video editing. All of that takes a lot more time. So I am adding, a pretty high hourly rate. When you multiply it by all the hours I'm spending, that's going to be a really nice premium that I get to add on top. And I think, again, back to that smaller creator, even if you're just making, right, air quotes, just making iPhone videos, quick 8 second trend, you're probably spending time researching trends, finding what music, submitting captions and submitting things back and forth with the client. That is labor, that is time. So I really want to make sure that you're not charging $10, of course, that you're asking yourself, if I was consulting this brand, if I was a social media manager, what am I charging hourly? And if you have no idea, you can go to websites like Upwork, right? And look up freelancers, look up what they're charging, come back and say, all right, if a video editor is charging $80 an hour, I'm going to charge $80 an hour. And I know that this campaign is going to be 10 hours. So there, you've got $800. Math is not my specialty, but I think that's where we're at.
Yes, no, I think you nailed that, math. And you are so right that the audience, what I call it, is distribution, right? Like, how many people will this content get in front of is only one layer, like you said, of the value that you bring to the table. And one way that, just to add on to what you shared, I feel like that I like to think about it is, if these brands weren't hiring you as this all-in-one creator, business owner, to be the talent, to edit the video, to, produce all the things, they would separately have to go out and hire like a video editor. They would separately have to go out and hire an actor to like deliver the lines. They would have to hire a writer to script the script. They would have to hire maybe a set production person to like find the location, to get the props, to all of these things have costs incurred in them. And so I think it's really great that you're encouraging smaller creators not to feel like, just because their audience size is, a couple hundred people, that they don't have value that they should be compensated for.
Exactly.
Offline needs. This is the one that I'm most curious about, because I've not heard it worded this way before, and it was part of like how you think about your rate. So what's like an offline need that you have been compensated for by a brand?
An example is, I recently did a pretty large deal with a brand where I actually had to attend a conference on their behalf. I wasn't even covering the conference, but part of it was showing up as a representative, showing up as part of their crew. So that was something that I knew was time. And I've also done campaigns where I'm also doing a speaking engagement. So I'm on a panel, but I'm also posting about the event. That would be an offline need. We talked about kind of consulting and pieces like that. That might be an offline need if you're doing a retainer with them. There was also a time that after a campaign, and I knew this was in the contract, they said, we want you to do a 10-question survey on how you like the product, give us feedback on the product. that is some random offline need that maybe you don't know how to price because they're just, again, pretty random. So that's
Yeah.
why I don't really bulk them into only the deliverables because sometimes it's not even one hard thing you're submitting. It's I'm showing up to an event. How much is my time worth? How much is me
Hmm.
stepping away from maybe client work if you're kind of a hybrid creator so that I could attend this event and ignore my emails for the day?
Yeah. Again, it goes back to that conversation of opportunity cost, right? It's like for every yes you're giving over here to a brand, it's actually saying no to like a thousand other things, a thousand other
Yeah.
potential monetary opportunities. And so being cognizant of that, I think, is absolutely essential. So thank you. That's really interesting too that you say, you were asked to attend on a brand's behalf, like to a conference. I've been asked before to like speak on a brand's behalf at a conference,
Yeah.
but not just to like purely be in the audience attending. And so that's really cool. I love hearing the creative ways people are
Yeah.
working with you. The timeline piece is also something that I am excited for you to chat about because I don't know about you, but I feel like we often get a lot of really last minute requests like, hey, we have this big push going out in 2 weeks. Like, can you jump on board and be part of this campaign? So,
Yeah.
how do you think about timeline? What do you consider a standard timeline for when a brand reaches out to you where you're like, okay, there's no additional charge here versus what do you consider like an expedited timeline where you might add an extra fee there?
Yeah, this is pretty personal because I think all of us have different business structures, right? So if you're someone who is pretty out of your business, more of that visionary role where you know you can step in and out, maybe a 2 week timeline feels doable for you. You're like,
Mhm.
oh, this is something I can do pretty quickly, and I know I have the time off.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I would say on average, a month is pretty standard. Anything less, you got to start questioning it, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, lately, especially in Q4, it's like brands say, oh, we have budget. Let's make sure we spend it. They're asking creators to do a lot of last minute work. So for me,
Mhm.
who has multiple revenue streams and who, is advising my team and kind of very much involved in my business, I need at least a month and anything less will come with that rush fee. Another
Mhm.
piece to think about with timeline is ask them for a full timeline because something that creators don't catch until it happens is they might say, and whatever feedback we give you, you have to turn it around in 24 hours. That might be really, really hard for someone. So you're
Yeah.
gonna add an extra fee because I think what you said, opportunity cost, it's taking time away from my clients, it's taking time away from my family. So you definitely want to make sure you add something. I would say in terms of rush, the pretty standard place to start is $500 maybe for every week that you know you're being rushed. Just really give yourself again, the opportunity cost can feel so personal because you might say, well, this is what I charge clients, right? If you're charging a client very premium dollars, like in my example, my strategy sessions are in the four figures. So if I have to block off my calendar for a few days to get this done, I'm
Yeah.
probably going to charge at least four figures just for that rush.
100%. That makes total sense. Do you ever run into a situation where, like, and I know you actually referenced this a moment ago where you said, I actually recommend that you submit your scripts for review so that you have less
Yeah.
like post editing work to do. But do you always allow brands to approve your scripts or your creative as part of the process? Or is that, again, a premium feature that you will negotiate for?
I always incorporate that. I always suggest that because, again, like you want to get paid really well for your time. And I'm a big believer that you can probably make more money doing less work, right? So
Yeah.
your time is very valuable. So for me, I also have the advertising background. I was working at Ogilvy, for those who aren't familiar, advertising company. So I'm used to knowing, like you mentioned, the creative director and what they're sharing, the
Hmm.
actor and the lines that they're delivering. So I try to treat it in that way, but very simplified. So I always have a document that I send the brand that says concept, right? And it's like one or two sentences to let them
Yes.
know the angle I want to take. And the second thing I share is visual examples. So no, I'm not doing a whole storyboard like I might have done in the advertising world, but it's just some examples of my own content or other creators' content that is inspiring me for what I want to produce. And then I
Mhm.
give them a script. Obviously, if it's video, there are times where there is no video involved. And what
Mhm.
that does is it allows me to have way less edits. I posted on
Mhm.
Threads recently. One of my humble brags is that I did 8 campaigns over the last few months, and one of them had edits. And the reason they had edits is they forgot to tell me something. So it
It
really
wasn't even on
is.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, it wasn't me. But it really is a nice way to save time. And all the clients I work with love it. I get
Mhm.
so many emails from them saying, you are so easy to work with. This is so professional. So it little goes a long way. Don't complicate it. Just a Google Doc with everything I just said. and, it will help you make sure that you're delivering everything on message. This should not feel creatively constricting. It should actually allow you to be more creative because you'll be able
Mhm.
to sit down and come up with all these ideas and concepts and make sure that someone is on board. It's not someone is scripting you and telling
Mhm.
you what to say.
Yeah, exactly. And getting on the same page early on and having clarity on both sides is so, so important to save you, like you said, the heartache of putting in all of this work and then being told, actually, you have to redo this entire thing. So
Yeah.
I love that you really make that part of your process. And I imagine because you are so easy to work with, because you do communicate so clearly, I imagine that's a huge factor in why brands continue to renew with you and, bring you in for renewed campaigns.
Mhm.
And so that's a great tip. The last piece of what you consider in your rate, your brand value, or I like to call it like the equity that you've like built up in a
Yeah.
space and how people perceive you or your company. This one I feel like sometimes can be the most intangible because it's all about, again, like I said, perception, right? So how do you think
Mhm.
about this when you're adding this into how you finalize the price of what you propose to a brand?
Yeah, this is the only part I get woo woo because I'm like, it's just a feeling. You kind of look at that number and you're like, do I feel valued? Yes or
Mhm.
no? And what I tell a lot of creators and what I do is, just start by rounding up. If I did all these calculations and it's 5,400, I'm going to round
Mhm.
up to six. I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, this is a business brand and business is what I talk about on my page. I'm going to ask for at least 9,500. And that might sound like a big sticker shock. Like, how did we
Mhm.
jump from six to 9,500? But you're going to be
Yeah.
negotiating. So if
Yeah.
six is kind of my bare minimum that covers everything I calculated, I'm
Yeah.
going to go higher up because that's a premium for a category that I know I'm an expert in.
That makes complete sense. And to your point, if they get you, Lisette, to show up on a video, the way it translates to the end user watching your video and how much trust they have in your recommendations is totally different than, again, if they hired a random actress to
Yeah.
recite the same lines, right? It doesn't carry the same weight, even if they're saying the exact same thing. So I
Yeah.
think that's definitely an underestimated piece. So that was a great way to put it. It is very much, I agree with you.
Yeah.
It very much is like a gut feeling. There's no
Totally.
science behind it.
And one thing I wanted to add, we hear the term UGC a lot, which is
Oh,
user generated
yeah.
content, and it basically means you're not posting anything. And
Mhm.
something that actually confuses a lot of people is, well, how do I calculate my deliverables? You actually can still consider your authority in all of these prices because, like you said, while yes, UGC sometimes is you're reading from a script and delivering lines because it's the brand's directive on what they're, you're making
Mhm.
content for them to use, for them to put on their pages. It's not going on yours, but your authority is still important. I have a client
Yeah.
that I work with that is in the space of hiring, right? And for me, I talk about this all the time. I talk about my team. So while they are only paying me, and they actually do give me a script, I speak to camera, obviously I'm aligned with what I'm saying, but
Mhm.
my price is higher because when someone sees my face in that content on that brand's page, they're going to say, oh, wow, Lisette is saying this. Oh, she probably uses this. And I do. So
Mhm.
that is some value that you can also still charge for.
Yes, so true. It's your association with their brand. It's like the reason why celebrities are able to charge like millions of dollars just to show up somewhere, right? Because
Yeah,
it's like their association with the venue or with the product just makes it more valuable inherently. And so
exactly.
love that. I want to next walk through. I feel like what you've already shared, these factors, is hugely helpful in people negotiating and getting to that equitable value, like you shared,
Yeah.
when they're proposing to a brand. But I also want to kind of walk through some common situations that creators or business owners might run into during a negotiation and how you personally have
Yeah.
responded in some of these sticky situations. So, for example, like what is a time you can think of when a brand proposed a budget to you that was much, much lower than you wanted to accept? They didn't have a
Mhm.
lot of wiggle room. How did you respond to a situation like that in a negotiation?
That's such a good one. And I have plenty of examples of other ones. But, this happens quite often, especially brands who aren't used to working with influencers, content creators. They are less likely to believe in the mission, so less likely to invest. And this actually starts, a lot of people tell you in negotiation, whoever throws the number first is the one who, is in the red. Like you can't be the first one to throw out a number. So a lot of people will say, ask, what's your budget? But the
Mm-hmm.
problem is just because someone says what their budget is, that doesn't mean that that's your rate. So,
Yeah.
what's your budget? If you even get an answer, is just going to guide you in how do I go from here in negotiating. If a
Mhm.
brand is giving you a number that's much higher than you even thought you were going to charge, awesome. There you go. That's your new rate. Don't charge any less ever again. But if a brand, this happens to me all the time, they'll come back and say, hey, my rate is, when I add all these things up, $6,000. They say, ooh, sorry, we only have 500. So you have two
Mm,
options here. One, you may be like, I'm not even that interested in this, partnership. I think it's going to take way too much time and I don't really care about this brand that much. Totally fine to
mhm,
walk away. But what I usually recommend is it has to be a combination of knowing where you win and validating why your price is your price and
mhm,
trying to meet them in a place that makes sense. I will not convince someone with $500 to pay me 6,000, but I might be able to convince someone with $500 to pay me 3,000 for a
mhm,
very short video or for a set of photos that I know I can probably do quickly, or maybe for two Instagram stories, right? If we add them up, I feel good about $3,000 on that. So you want
mhm,
to actually try to make it very collaborative. Say, hey, I
mhm,
want to meet you here, and this is why. And something
mhm,
that can help you in that process, when you hear what's your budget, you're totally in the right to ask, can you tell me a little bit more about the goals here? And this actually
mhm,
happened to me. It was a thing now, 2 years ago, a brand that I totally love in the finance space. They hadn't really worked with influencers before. They said, we want to do something with you. Something. Okay, that's like very random. People might think a post on your feed. When I asked for their budget, it was quite low. I think it was about $1,000 at the time. So what I
mhm,
went back to them and asked, what's your real goal here? And they said, we just want people to sign up for our app. Okay. An in-feed post will actually not get you there because it's
mhm.
not clickable. It's actually, no one watches your post as much as we say, click the link in my bio. People will not go and leave to click the link
Yeah.
in your bio. So what I suggested is, okay, I can't really accept 1,000, but what if we did 2,500? And I'm going to mention you in my newsletter, which is an easy lift for me. I just kind of
Mhm,
added them in the newsletter I sent regularly. And I'm going to do a set of stories because I know it's more likely that someone's going to click on things because of that. We did that.
mhm.
They loved the results. They ended up hiring me for 3 phases of content after that. So
So
really
awesome.
delivering on their mission, on their goal is going to help you.
I am in 1000% agreement with you. That's exactly how we approach all of our brand partnerships too. We always start with the objective first. Like, how would
Mhm.
the brand define success at the end of our partnership or
Yeah.
campaign? And then to your point, it takes really knowing your audience and how they behave, right? Because if you are not in tune with your community, then you wouldn't have known, oh, they're probably not going to be driven to action from an Instagram feed post versus a link in my newsletter. And so I think that's an important lesson for all of our listeners, like really understanding your audience behavior and knowing what types of content drive what types of action and matching that with the brand's end objective so that you can have a successful campaign that results in, like what you said, getting hired on for three more after the fact. So that's
Yeah.
brilliant.
Yeah. When someone has low rate, is there anything else you can negotiate in a value? For example, if you're a newer creator or a smaller creator, and maybe you're charging 1,000 already, that feels good for you, but you've got this person who wants to pay you
Mhm.
$200. Yes, you may be able to ask like for them to boost it up a little, but what about also asking, would you be willing to give me a testimonial after this? Would you be
Mhm.
willing to, give me access to your list of subscribers? Like whatever you feel is valuable. Maybe it's a brand that you really want to work with, and not just, "Ugh, I really want to work with them, so I'm going to give them a discount." It's, I really want to work with you. Will you guarantee that you will hire me for 3 rounds of content? And I did this
Mhm.
actually with a UGC project. So, again, not posting on my page, it was a business brand, and they had really low budget. And I said, okay, can you come here? Right. I think we got to $700 for like a 15-second video, which I was like,
Mhm.
that will take me 15 seconds.
Yeah.
And I basically said, but I don't want to accept one $700 campaign.
Yeah.
Can you try to do three per month? And they've done 2 to 3 per month. That's nice because I get
Mhm.
$1,400 minimum a month just
Mhm.
by doing these videos that I already know how to make because I work with them so regularly. And what's
Mhm.
interesting is this year, they're one of my highest paying clients, repeat clients. And it's purely because we guaranteed that they were going to do a higher quantity of buy-ins, even though it was a lower rate.
So smart. Yes. And I love that you brought up like what are the other ways that brand can add value to make up the gap if money isn't the only thing available for negotiation, which it never is. And to your
Yeah.
point, that reminds me of like times that we've asked like tech brands like, hey, can you cover our software subscription then for a year?
Yeah.
Can you cover our travel costs to this, event that I really want to go to? Or yeah, like you said, can you use me as a case study and feature us in front of your entire audience? So yeah, there's
Yeah.
definitely, I think, so much room to get creative there. And I love that you think in such an expansive and collaborative way. I guess on the opposite end of the spectrum, well, not the opposite end of the spectrum, on an even lower tier of the spectrum, I should say, if a brand doesn't have budget at all and they come to you
Ooh.
with, hey, we want to gift you product in exchange for whatever that is, right?
Yeah.
Do you ever say yes to gifted asks? And if so, why? And if not, how do you try to steer the conversation from there?
Yeah, it's actually a mix. Mostly no, but what I say is no, I can't guarantee content to you. But if you would like to gift me this experience, this product, I'm all ears. You can send it on. This has happened to me, for example, recently. I'm a new mom, so they actually sent me baby carriers. And I was like, I'm in the market. I literally have a newborn. I hated the one I had. I returned it. And actually, this brand person saw my stories. So a little nod. You never know who's watching. And
Mm-hmm.
she reached out and I said, yeah, send them over. I can't guarantee anything, but obviously, if I love it, I'll definitely talk about it. I did end up loving it. I ended up buying another myself with my own money. And because I became such a loyal brand fan, they ended up hiring me for a campaign later on that was paid. It was paid really well. So that's why sometimes I am saying, no, I can't guarantee it, but I'm happy to accept this because you never know if that relationship is going to lead to something else in the future. Now, the idea of working for trade, I always have to remind creators that no matter what you're getting gifted, you will have to legally pay taxes on all of that. So
Mm-hmm.
if someone is giving you a $3,000 gift card to your favorite store, that sounds really nice because you might be like, well, I'm not paying for that I would have anyway. But know that legally, there's a question mark if people actually do this, but legally, you should be paying taxes on that non-monetary compensation. So,
Mm-hmm.
is it worth it to take that $3,000 gift card for that place you already spent $3,000 on, but knowing you may have to pay a little bit of taxes on it? The answer for you might be yes, but you
Mm-hmm.
really have to just consider that cost of doing labor for them anyway.
Yes, I'm so glad that you brought in that additional consideration because that is, I think, a common misconception for a lot of people that gifted products can't be taxed. But yes, consult with your accountant if you're listening, if
Yes,
you're unsure.
this is not financial
Yeah,
advice.
right. Disclaimer. We are not financial experts, but definitely consult with your CPA. I think even when I'm thinking on times that I've maybe accepted gifted offers with the expectation of posting, I usually do what you do. Like you said, like, hey, send it my way. And if I love it, I might organically share it. But I think most of the time, if it is going to be in exchange for content, it has to be something like you said, like, congrats, by the way, I'm recently becoming a mom that
Thank
I'm
you.
already in the market for, that I was already going to pay out of pocket for anyways. Like if I was like
Yeah.
redesigning my office and a furniture company came and said, hey, we'll,
Right.
gift you furniture. Sure. Maybe that makes sense because I was going to spend that money anyway. So excellent, excellent points. Are there any other sticky situations you've been in with a brand before that you want to impart on our listeners?
Oh, yeah, this is a newly common one. So I definitely want to raise the red flag. It's brands saying they will only pay, and they'll use these terms for CPM or CTR. And what they mean is for the level of views you have and for the level of sales you drive. And
Mhm.
that's really difficult because, as you know, we talked about the cost of labor. Even if, you're only giving the brand, and I say only, but, 5,000 views and
Mhm.
you charged $4,000, right? They might be like, whoa, that's $1 per view. That feels pretty high in relation to what we can get from paid ads. But the problem is for a paid ad, you are actually still hiring a production team to make the ad. So,
Mhm.
what I always tell creators, and this is interesting because these are the people that are hardest to convert.
Mhm.
And what you have to understand is that you don't know what team is reaching out to you. It might be a sales team, it might be the affiliate marketing team, and they don't understand the cost of labor, the cost of production. So
Mhm.
if you are open to it, I always suggest that you go in and you explain, hey, my rate doesn't only reflect my views, it doesn't only reflect the amount of clicks or sales I make. I also wear many hats. And that
Mhm.
means that I'm spending a lot of labor on producing the content that you don't have to produce for me. I am not a
Mhm.
billboard. I am a real human with many hats. So usually
Yeah.
you know, it's when I say like not everyone goes for this, it's truly because it's people who do not have experience in the space. But
Mhm.
sometimes you are able to convince someone that yes, you deserve kind of a production cost. And what I've seen happen, this happened to me once where it was a brand that I actually convert really high on. It's a health
Mhm.
brand and a tracker of sorts. And when we were working on a campaign, they didn't have budget. They don't really work with influencers. We got like a very small flat fee plus a very healthy commission. So I think it was
Mhm.
like $50 per, person who buys this thing. That's
Mhm.
really nice because I know I convert. So I was able to not only make the small fee, I was able to supplement that with probably about one to $2,000 worth from what I saw.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those hybrid deals, as I call them, are such a great solution for those brands with lower budgets, but who, like you said, you can convert well for on the back end.
Yeah,
But that's so interesting. I actually have not had that come across my desk yet in terms of a brand, offering based on CPMs. But it's interesting because as a full-time podcaster, that is the language that ad agencies speak when they want to advertise on our show, right? They're always basing
exactly.
rates on per thousand listens or downloads or whatnot. But I haven't yet seen that crossover for me yet into the other content channel spaces like Instagram or email or whatnot. But even in the podcasting space, Lisette, I cannot stand that so much of paid media is determined only by CPM because exactly to all the things that you just said, it's
Yeah.
not the same thing having a trusted resource or a recognized brand or face associate or endorse essentially your product and service and have them create the content as you
Mhm.
submitting something to Facebook ads and getting it in front of random people who don't have any sort of trust built into the relationship with your brand. And so I just love the way that you framed that for our listeners. Well, this has been, hugely helpful. I feel like anyone who listened to this episode just got like a masterclass in negotiating brand deals. So very thankful for you and your transparency and expertise there. Where can our listeners continue to connect with you, learn from you after this episode?
Yeah, so my personal socials at Lisette Cal, you kind of get a little bit of the behind the scenes. My broadcast channel there is actually fully dedicated to all things creator business. And I will talk about, brand partnerships and how I did them. I will talk about not explicitly what I got paid for who, because, confidentiality in our contracts, but I will give clues and hints and really showing them, how I made a partnership different. And then Influence with Impact is our business, and that's where we give a little bit more of the broad educational client-based, testimonials and case studies for you to understand how it applies to different types of creators. Because that's something I hear often is, but I'm in this niche. Does this niche pay? Everyone
Mhm.
pays. You just got to know how to ask. So that's where you can find both things and across other platforms as well. Instagram and Threads are actually the ones I use the most.
I love that. Thank you so much for your time. All of Lisette's links will be below in the show notes. If you're listening or if you're watching this on YouTube in the video description, thank you all for joining us, and we'll catch you in next week's episode.
Thank you.